But those are the guys that are close. They can bring people in from, the Chinese have the biggest merchant shipping fleet in the world with the biggest ships. You can load those ships up with as many troops as you want and drive them right into San Diego and Long Beach and San Francisco and unload people. You can fly people in. When they start doing this, they'll do it because the government says they're going to help us. They're our friends. They're our allies.
Now, see, I would think of this as insane and crazy, and they never get away with it. But they have all these generals and Wesley Clark and all of them telling the troops this is going to happen, getting them ready. Tell folks about that.
Well, yeah, back in several years ago, this plan was already developed, and Barry McCaffrey, who was a general in the Army at the time, went to CASQ class at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, that my nephew was in. And he was a young West Pointer, a captain. He'd done 2 tours in Somalia, and he was graduating from the Command and Staff College up there. And Clark, the general came in there, and he was introduced. McCaffrey was introduced as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Well, immediately Brian stood up and took notice of that and started taking notes. And afterwards he called me and he said, "You're not going to believe what this guy said." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "With us committed, if we ever get committed on 2 fronts, because we weren't at that time, this was in the 90s. He says, if we ever get committed on 2 fronts, because of the build down in the armed forces, we will not have sufficient assets at home to handle civil disorder." And I'm thinking, wait a minute, the military is not supposed to handle civil disorder to begin with. And then he goes on to say that we will be forced to call upon foreign assets to patrol our streets. So this plan that was initiated by the Council on Foreign Relations, a decade and a half ago, is it's on the shelf. It's ready to go. What do you do with all the people that you have to deal with? Well, you've got 3 choices. You've got deadly weapons, you've got non-lethal weapons, and you've got relocation. The relocation breaks down into the volunteers, get on the bus, we're going to get you out of here, there's a biological hazard, there's a radiological hazard, whatever, and we're going to move you to a safe location until it's okay to come home. The other one is the non-volunteers that they'll just simply go out and say, okay, you refuse to take your flu shots, or you refuse to take the mark, or you refuse this, you're going with us, period. Your kids are going over there, you're going over here, and the husband's going to the work gang.
Actually, in the dark winter scenarios the Pentagon put out, top off 1, 2, and 3, and the drill they are starting today, if you don't go along with them and, quote, you may be contaminated, they just go ahead and burn your farm down or kill you. So they're publicly admitting that they've trained them for that.
Yeah, and let's go back to what you said earlier. We didn't address that. What are you going to do if somebody comes to take your gold? Well, they got to find it first. You don't just simply have it sitting there on the coffee table, folks. If you're going to invest in gold, put it someplace safe. Give it a military funeral somewhere. You can do the same thing with ammunition. You can do the same thing with food. I mean, you have to think ahead. You have to think defensively. And you can't have everything you want. No one goes to war with what you want. You go to war with what you have. And so you have to think of what are you going to do if we get into a totalitarian society and it becomes so dictatorial that you have no choice but to either go along with it, fight, or die.
And by the way, Congressman Brown, who's on a lot of committees, has gone public saying, look, there's open discussion about this. And then Congress, 5 weeks ago, was threatened with martial law if they didn't pass the banker takeover bill, which, again, was unlimited trillions. It's not $700 billion. It's already $5 trillion they've sucked out, $2 trillion they won't say where it went. And they actually threatened Congress with martial law. And I've talked to Republican and Democratic congressmen who were told that, but under House rules, they were told you can't tell anyone or they can be kicked out of the House. I think those rules are wrong. I mean, we've got to that point, Colonel. It's really happening.
Well, the government's been taken over by the communists. It's as simple as that. We don't control the government anymore. It's a rogue elephant. It's out of control. What we have to do now...
It's just like in America with a K. They still have the Congress there.
Yeah.
It's just not our Congress.
No, it's the comradeship. The problem is, when I was in school in the 50s and 60s, we learned about communism. I can still remember words like, Communist Manifesto and Karl Marx and Lenin and Stalin and all of that, and dialectic materialism. You haven't heard that one in a long time. These kids today don't get any of that education. It's left out on purpose. And they don't get much American history, and what they do get in American history has all been so corrupted that, World War II is 2 pages and something else that's socialist is 15 pages. It's incredible what they've done to kids in the government school systems. So now you don't know how to identify the enemy if you've never been trained on what the enemy looks like.
Well, Craig, forget that. The average kids don't even know where the U.S. is on a map, literally.
Well, and they can't spell, they can't read and write, they can't, I don't know.
Which is in all the government documents, which was done by design.
No, you sit there and your mouth just falls open because, I'm at the age where I can compare what it was like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and what it is today. But the youngsters, they don't have anything to compare it with. All they have is what their friends tell them, who are smarter than their parents, they always have been, and their teachers, who are pretty much controlled by the NEA, and the NEA is a global socialist UN organization.
But let's explain. We're not saying commies under the cupboard. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, they had House hearings in the 70s. They cold-bloodedly said to enslave everybody, we'll socialize everything to get control and break up the families, and then we'll have global serfs under a world government's control run by the private banks.
Well, yeah. Excuse me, I've been dealing with a terrible chest cold.
I have too.
It's been for weeks.
Did you know that I hit the cough button right then and was coughing while you were coughing? That's funny.
I don't know if it's the chemtrails or what it is. It's terrible.
Oh, man. Oh.
But what we're having right now is a failure to communicate. Those of us who know what's going on are not communicating well with our neighbors, our family, and our friends. Now, they say a man is never a prophet in his own village, and I found that to be true, and I think everybody else has that's ever tried to talk about this to their family or their close friends. I talked about this years ago in our police department, and I got labeled a nut. Then, after I retired, I had some of those guys that worked in Intel over at the PD call up and say, hey, we want to know some more because you were just way ahead of your time. And I said, well, it's too late. I don't, it's just, you got too much homework to do. But I talked about all this in my book, Kill Zone. When I go back, beyond the Kennedy assassination, I go back into the powers that be and what their agendas are, and I talk about the education, and I talk about the Carnegies, and I talk about the Ford Foundation, and I talk about, the Rothschild plan and all of that. And people have read that book, and they fall into one of 2 categories. One is total disbelief and denial, and the other is I want to know more. Well, you find out that about 20% of the population wants to know more and wants to get involved in it. About probably 40%, and I'm hip shooting this, about 40% are, well, yeah, I kind of believe it, but I don't want to get involved. I don't really want to know more because it scares me. And then the rest totally just deny it ever being a possibility. And so I've run into that over and over again. But we got to remember there was only, 17% of the population fought the Revolutionary War?
Well, about 4% started it.
Yeah, it was a very small percentage, and beat the British Army. So it's not.
There's a small group of them, and there's a small group of us, and they operate by lying and stampeding the mindless herd. We have to find people who aren't mindless in the herd and get them activated to start warning everybody, and that is happening. I'm seeing a huge awakening, Colonel. I want to go to some phone calls, and we're going to do it after the break. You'll be with us 15 minutes in the next hour, graciously. RifleWarrior.com is the website. Be sure and check it out. But, Colonel, I've had spiritual experiences that I don't talk about on air. I just leave it at that. But death experiences, near-death experiences, but you did die, are something universally people have pretty much the same type of experiences. And, I think that story you tell is so important for people that don't realize we're only here once. This life is a test. It's so important, and a lot of people are cowed. They're scared. They don't understand that we're here to be tested by this. Tell folks that story, please, because it's so important.
Well, in August of 1997, I'd been going through about a 6-month battle with colon cancer that metastasized and went all over my body. I kept getting sicker and sicker, and I was on chemotherapy at the time, which that turned out to be the problem. That was the big mistake. And I got to the point to where I got down to about 160 pounds, and I couldn't hardly get out of bed. And one day I tried to stand up out of bed and fell on the floor. Long story short, my wife called 911. The fire department showed up first. My blood pressure was 60/0 on falling. Ambulance showed up next. They said I wouldn't make it to the hospital. They loaded me up, took me to the hospital, and I got into the ER, and I was on a gurney, and the doctors came in, and they said that they wanted to know if I had a living will. And I said, I don't know. I don't know what a living will is. I've got a will. They said, no, this is do we unplug you if, you're not going to make it? And I said, I'm going to make it. And they said, well, we got 6 doctors in here to work on you tonight. And I said, no, you got 7. I said, God's here. You just listen to him. You just pay attention to what he says, and he'll guide you through it. And they kind of got a chuckle out of that. And they said, well, we're not expecting the best. And they turned around and started to walk out. And an orderly came in and he started to put a tube down my throat or down my nose. And that's all I knew. The next thing I knew, I was not there anymore. I was sitting in a big dark room. It was cool. It felt comfortable. I felt perfectly healthy. I felt like I was like 23 years old. I didn't care at all about this life anymore. Time meant nothing. And I knew that I'd come through a portal or a doorway or something to my left. And there was another one on my right, and the decision was being made to take me on or send me back. And I also knew that in front of me, there's a portal that would open up that would send me straight to hell. Hell exists, folks. Heaven exists. This is real stuff. I didn't make this up. I didn't dream it. I knew that my guardian angel was there that I'd known all my life.